In 1883, a broke, half-blind, friendless philosopher sat alone in a rented room in Switzerland. There, he wrote a sentence that would outlive empires. Man is something that shall be overcome.
He wasn't talking about disease. He wasn't talking about death. He was talking about you, as you are right now. Comfortable, agreeable, following rules you never consciously chose. Nietzsche looked at the average human being and saw something closer to an unfinished draft than a finished person. Then he described what could come next, something he called the Übermensch. Not a superhero, not a tyrant, something far more unsettling. A person who no longer asks permission to live on their own terms. Now here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Nietzsche wasn't writing fantasy. He was offering a diagnosis of why almost everyone you know, perhaps even you, has quietly accepted becoming smaller than they're capable of being. And he believed there was a very specific psychological mechanism keeping people there. A mechanism so ordinary that most never even notice it. Because the people who benefit from you not noticing have made sure it stays invisible. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that mechanism is, why Nietzsche believed escaping it was one of the most dangerous things a human being could ever do, and whether you've already surrendered to it without even realizing. Friedrich Nietzsche was not a comfortable man, and he did not write comfortable philosophy. Born in 1844 in Prussia, the son of a Lutheran pastor, he was raised in a household soaked in exactly the kind of morality he would spend his adult life dismantling. He became a professor of classical philology at 24, the youngest in the university's history, and by his 30s, chronic illness had stripped him of his post, his health, and most of his social world. He wrote his most dangerous ideas in near isolation, migrating between cheap boarding houses in Switzerland and Italy, plagued by migraines so severe he was sometimes blind for days. This matters, because the Übermensch was not the idea of a comfortable man theorizing from safety. It was the idea of a man who had lost almost everything society uses to measure worth: status, health, companionship, and who concluded that the entire measuring system was the problem, not his position on it. When Thus Spoke Zarathustra was published, it did not make him famous. It made him notorious in small, dangerous circles, and largely ignored everywhere else. Critics called it incoherent. Theologians called it blasphemous. It sold so poorly that Nietzsche self-funded parts of the printing. It wasn't until decades after his death, and after his sister disturbingly distorted his work to align with nationalist ideology, he explicitly despised that the world caught up to what he'd actually written. Here is the distortion you need cleared up immediately, because it's the single most common misunderstanding of this concept. The Übermensch has nothing to do with racial superiority, nationalism, or domination over other people. That reading was grafted on after Nietzsche's death by people editing his unpublished notes for propaganda. Nietzsche despised German nationalism, despised anti-Semitism explicitly in his letters, and broke ties with close friends over it. The Übermensch was never about ruling others. It was about a war fought entirely within one person. The war to stop being ruled by inherited values you never examined. That reframe is everything. This isn't a philosophy about power over other people. It's a philosophy about power over the version of yourself that was built by other people. Strip away the mistranslations and mythology, and the Übermensch is simple to define, even if it's hard to become. It is a human being who creates their own values instead of inheriting them. That's it. That's the whole concept. But sit with how radical that actually is. Right now, without realizing it, most of your beliefs about what's good, what's shameful, what's worth pursuing, what you owe other people, and what success looks like, none of that was chosen by you. It was installed by parents, religion, school systems, social media algorithms, culture. and the quiet pressure of everyone around you agreeing on the same things simultaneously. You didn't sit down and derive your values from first principles. You absorbed them the way you absorbed a language, before you were capable of consenting to it. Nietzsche called this inherited value system herd morality, not as an insult to intelligence, but as a description of function. Herd morality exists to keep large groups of people predictable, cooperative, and controllable. It rewards humility, self-sacrifice, guilt, and obedience, not because those traits are objectively virtue, but because a population full of humble, self-sacrificing, guilty, obedient people is easy to manage. The Übermensch is what happens when a person looks directly at that system, recognizes it as a system rather than as truth, and then does something almost nobody has the psychological stomach to do: builds their own values from scratch and lives by them regardless of whether anyone approves. Notice what this requires. It requires you to survive the disapproval of people who benefit from your obedience. It requires tolerating the discomfort of not having an external authority to blame when things go wrong, because you're now the author of your own standards. It requires giving up the psychological safety of, "I was just following the rules," because you no longer have rules that weren't yours to begin with. Most people never attempt this, not because they lack intelligence, but because herd morality is engineered to make the attempt feel like moral failure. The first time you break from inherited values, your own nervous system will scream that you're doing something wrong, because guilt was the leash the whole time, and leashes don't release quietly. Nietzsche didn't see this as a personal defect in weak-willed people. He saw it as the system functioning exactly as designed. A society organized around obedience needs its members to feel obedience as virtue rather than as compliance. Otherwise, the whole arrangement would be visible for what it is, and visible control invites resistance. Guilt, shame, and the fear of judgment are the invisible version. They don't need enforcement from the outside, because they've been installed to enforce themselves from within. This is precisely why Nietzsche considered the Übermensch's task so difficult. You're not fighting an external opponent you can identify and confront. You're fighting a structure embedded in your own conscience, built so early and so thoroughly that it feels indistinguishable from your own voice. To understand why Nietzsche thought this was urgent, not just interesting, but urgent, you have to understand his most infamous line: "God is dead, and we have killed him." He wasn't celebrating atheism like a slogan. He was diagnosing a crisis most of Europe hadn't noticed yet. For centuries, an entire civilization's sense of right and wrong rested on the assumption of a divine authority handing down absolute rules. Nietzsche watched that assumption quietly collapsing under science, secularism, and modernity. And he understood something almost nobody else grasped in the moment. If the foundation goes, the structure built on top of it doesn't hold either. Morality doesn't survive the death of its source by default. It survives on inertia. For a while, people kept behaving as though the old rules mattered, even after they'd stopped believing in what justified those rules. Nietzsche predicted this inertia would eventually run out, leaving a vacuum. And into vacuums, he warned, rush the most dangerous ideologies. Because people would rather adopt any replacement structure, however destructive, than sit inside the discomfort of having no structure at all. This is where the dark psychology of the concept sharpens. Nietzsche wasn't just talking about religion. He was describing a mechanism that still runs today, stripped of its theological packaging. Most people cannot tolerate the anxiety of moral self-authorship, so they outsource it to political tribes, to influencers, to corporate ladders that define success for them, to whatever authority will hand them a script so they don't have to write one. The Übermensch is the psychological opposite of this outsourcing. It is the willingness to stand inside that vacuum, the discomfort of no external authority, and construct meaning without demanding someone else supply it first. Nietzsche called this the loneliest position a human being can occupy. He also called it the only honest one. There's a reason manipulators, cult leaders, and authoritarian systems all target this exact vulnerability first: people's discomfort with owning their own values. Give someone a rule book and a sense of belonging, and you've bypassed the hardest, most important psychological work a person can do. The Übermensch is Nietzsche's answer to that vulnerability. Become someone the vacuum can't recruit, because you've already filled it yourself. Consider how this plays out in ordinary life, far from cults or dictatorships. Someone who has never done the work of building their own values is unusually easy to steer. By a manipulative partner who redefines love as obedience, by a workplace culture that redefines exploitation as dedication, by an algorithm that redefines belonging as engagement with outrage. In every case, the mechanism is the same one Nietzsche diagnosed: an unfilled moral vacuum, waiting for the nearest confident voice to fill it on someone else's terms. The people most vulnerable to psychological manipulation are rarely the unintelligent. They're the ones who never finished asking themselves what they actually believe, and so they borrow certainty from whoever offers it loudest. Beneath the concept of self-authored values sits something Nietzsche considered even more fundamental: the will to power. This is one of the most misread ideas in the history of philosophy. So let's be precise about it. Will to power is not primarily about domination over other people. Nietzsche used it to describe the basic drive underlying all living behavior: the drive to grow, expand capability, overcome resistance, and exert influence over one's own circumstances rather than be passively shaped by them. A plant pushing through concrete towards sunlight is expressing will to power. A person mastering a skill despite repeated failure is expressing will to power. It is, at its core, the refusal to remain a passive object of forces acting upon you. Here's the psychological claim that makes this dangerous. Nietzsche believed this drive exists in everyone, but most people repress it, redirect it, or disguise it, because expressing it openly is punished by herd morality. Ambition gets relabeled as arrogance, self-assertion gets relabeled as selfishness, refusing to defer gets relabeled as rudeness. So the drive doesn't disappear. It goes underground, and it leaks out sideways as resentment, passive aggression, gossip, or a quiet, corrosive bitterness toward people who did express it openly and got what they wanted. Nietzsche had a specific word for this leaked, repressed version: ressentiment. It's the psychology of someone who lacks the will to pursue what they actually want, and instead builds an entire moral framework around condemning people who do. Notice how often disapproval of ambitious, unapologetic people gets dressed up as virtue? They're so full of themselves. They need to be humbled. Who do they think they are? Nietzsche's claim is uncomfortable. A significant portion of that disapproval isn't principled. It's repressed will to power, curdled into moral judgment, because the person expressing the judgment never let themselves want anything that badly out loud. The Übermensch doesn't repress this drive, and doesn't apologize for it either. But, and this distinction is where people most often misread Nietzsche, the Übermensch also doesn't unleash it destructively onto other people, because an undisciplined will to power is just as much a failure of mastery as a repressed one. The goal isn't domination over others. It's the disciplined, conscious direction of your own drive toward growth, rather than letting it rot into resentment or explode into cruelty. Power, for Nietzsche, is first and foremost power over yourself. This is why Nietzsche repeatedly praised self-overcoming above conquest. The person who masters a craft through years of failure, who disciplines an unruly temper into precision, who forces a weak body into strength through sheer repetition, that person is exercising will to power in its purest form, with no other human being required as a target. Compare that to someone who only feels powerful when belittling others, extracting compliance through fear, or measuring their worth against people they've made smaller. Nietzsche considered that second version a symptom of weakness wearing the costume of strength, a person who cannot generate power internally, and so must steal the appearance of it externally. The Übermensch is recognizable by exactly this distinction: strength that doesn't need an audience to confirm it versus dominance that collapses the instant no one is watching. Nietzsche left behind one thought experiment more brutal than almost anything else in his writing, and he considered it the single hardest test he could offer a human being. Imagine a demon visits you in your loneliest moment and tells you this: the life you are living now, every joy, every humiliation, every wasted year, every relationship, every regret, you will live again, not once more, infinitely, exactly as it happened, in exactly the same order, forever, with no changes and no escape. Nietzsche's question is simple and devastating. Would this news crush you, or would you fall to your knees and call it the greatest thing you've ever heard? This is eternal recurrence, and it's not really a claim about cosmology. Nietzsche wasn't making a scientific prediction about the universe looping. It's a diagnostic tool. It's designed to expose, instantly, whether you are living a life you actually authored or a life you've been passively enduring while waiting for some future version of yourself to finally start. Most people, if they're honest, recoil from the thought experiment. And that recoil is information. It means some significant portion of your life right now is being spent on obligations you didn't choose. Relationships maintained out of guilt rather than desire. Work performed for approval rather than meaning. Days passed in numbness rather than intention. If infinite repetition of your current life sounds like a punishment, Nietzsche's diagnosis is blunt. You are not yet living as the author of your life. You're living as its passenger. This connects directly back to the Übermensch, because eternal recurrence is the test of whether someone has actually done the work of self-authored values or has just adopted the aesthetic of it. Amor fati, the love of one's fate, is Nietzsche's proposed cure. Not blind positivity, not denial of suffering, but a fierce, deliberate embrace of your exact life, including its wounds, as material you would choose again rather than erase. It's one of the most demanding psychological postures a person can attempt, because it requires converting even your worst chapters into something you'd willingly relive, rather than something you're still trying to escape. Nietzsche believed this drive exists in everyone, but most people repress it, redirect it, or disguise it, because expressing it openly is punished by herd morality. Ambition gets relabeled as arrogance, self-assertion gets relabeled as selfishness, refusing to defer gets relabeled as rudeness. So the drive doesn't disappear. It goes underground, and it leaks out sideways as resentment, passive aggression, gossip, or a quiet, corrosive bitterness toward people who did express it openly and got what they wanted. Nietzsche had a specific word for this leaked, repressed version: ressentiment. It's the psychology of someone who lacks the will to pursue what they actually want, and instead builds an entire moral framework around condemning people who do. Nietzsche's discipline is different. Pause, and ask whether the guilt is protecting something you actually value, or whether it's herd morality punishing you for stepping outside a rule you never agreed to. Guilt that traces back to your own chosen values deserves respect. Guilt that traces back only to "people will disapprove" is data about other people's discomfort, not a verdict on your character. Third, stop outsourcing your self-worth to validation you didn't ask to need. This is the practical antidote to ressentiment. Every time you catch yourself resenting someone else's confidence, success, or boldness, treat that resentment as a map pointing directly at a desire you've repressed in yourself. The discipline isn't to suppress the resentment, it's to interrogate it until it reveals what you actually want and have been too afraid to pursue. Fourth, Practice amor fati deliberately, especially with your worst material. Take one difficult chapter of your life, a failure, a betrayal, a loss, and instead of narrating it as something that happened to you, rewrite the narration as something that built the specific capabilities you now rely on. This isn't self-deception. It's choosing which true story about your past you allow to shape your present. Because multiple true stories are almost always available. And Nietzsche's bet is that the empowering one deserves the same claim to truth as the victimized one. None of these 4 disciplines are comfortable. All of them will cost you relationships, approval, or the psychological safety of blaming external rules for your choices. That cost is not a bug in Nietzsche's philosophy. It's the entire point. He was explicit that the Übermensch is rare, precisely because almost nobody is willing to pay it. It's worth being honest about what that cost looks like in practice, rather than treating it as an abstract warning. People closest to you may read your self-authorship as arrogance, because your refusal to defer to values they still hold unconsciously threatens the quiet agreement that kept the relationship stable. Colleagues may read your disinterest in approval as coldness. Nietzsche didn't offer comfort on this point. He considered it proof the work was real. A version of self-overcoming that costs you nothing and offends no one was never a departure from herd morality in the first place. It was herd morality wearing a new outfit. Go back to that broke, half-blind philosopher in his rented room in 1883. He had every external reason to see himself as diminished. No status, no health, no wide recognition while he was alive to witness it. And instead of writing a philosophy of comfort, he wrote a demand. Overcome what you currently are. Not because you're broken, because you're unfinished, and you've likely mistaken the unfinished draft for the final version, the way almost everyone does. So here's the actual question this video was building toward, the one Nietzsche wanted every reader to sit with long after they closed the book. If the demon appeared tonight and told you that everything about your life right now repeats forever, exactly as it is, would you fall to your knees in gratitude or in dread? Whichever answer came first, faster than you could edit it, that's the truest data you have about whether you're living your values or someone else's.